right. Well, welcome to what I call the last stretch of the Vienna Migration Conference. And I think I found a fascinating actually morning where we focused on labor migration. We will come back now in the next two sessions to a topic which I would say is central, will be central to the European migration policy in the, not only next, in the years to come. For those who were here yesterday, the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum was already very much present in the statements and the discussions right from the beginning. When you remember, we had the Greek minister, we had the Austrian minister, we had the Belgian state secretary, and I just noted a few points down which I think will also be relevant actually for this conversation, which we will have now for half an hour, but afterwards, if you're by then not yet fed up with the Pact, we will continue with the Pact and we'll speak with representatives actually from the EU agencies on operational issues. But yesterday I found interesting actually, I think it was the State Secretary from Belgium who said, you know, we had, until the adoption, we had a, let's call it a negotiation reality. Now we have a legal reality. We have to make that legal reality an operational reality and also a political reality. I think all three ministers underlined the importance of the Pact. I think that was a central piece of their interventions. And then you could note some nuances. I said, yes, the Pact, but we also need something addition. Yes, we have the Pact, but we also have to look at one or the other piece of legislation. I mean, return directive was very much put to the fore. I think we'll come to that as well after the discussions was also mentioned again and again in the European Council last week. But also, I think interesting, a few times mentioned, well, you know, the European Union as it is, 27 member states, and 27 member states means, I mean, we can say, oh, so different, it's a problem. On the other hand, personally, I would say that's the beauty of the European Union, that we have 27 member states, and yeah, question then how to provide for a coherent policy. Two more points. One, we can also probably touch here up and that a little bit later, and was also put for, we need resources. I mean, resources, funding is part of the discussions as well. And last but not least, I think it was a comment from the audience, is right when you, I mean, could be directed to those in Brussels, like you in Brussels, I'm also Brussels-based, there are many others here Brussels-based, but you are then not only Brussels, but in the EU, you should realize whatever you do in the EU, whatever you do with this highly sophisticated protection regime you have in Europe, you know, you will be looked at very carefully from outside, from countries around the world, and changes will be very carefully noted. So many points which I found made already, sort of an introduction to also the discussion we want to have now. We have a good half an hour right now, and as I said before, we'll continue that with a discussion with representatives from three EU agencies. Now, we did not have yesterday a representative from the European Commission yet, so I'm very happy that we have with us the Deputy Director-General in DG Home, Johannes Luchner. It's a pleasure to have you. You're looking back at a long career in the European Commission, but now, I think it's since 2020 that you are with what is known as DG Home. You spend a lot of time traveling the world, spending your time on what we call the external dimension, but it's probably true to say that right now, whoever works in DG Home is mobilized to look at the Pact. So very warm welcome. And thanks you for your availability and readiness to be here this morning. And I mean, looking at the Pact, I think comes a very innocent, naive question. I mean, up until the adoption, everybody was in Brussels, was looking at, oh, will we adopt, will we not adopt? Now, it's adopted. We are a few months in this new phase where we don't really know, is it already the implementation phase? Is it the preparation for the implementation phase? Does it feel different after these few months that we have the pact? And I think by now you have worked already intensively with member states. Do you see already some issues which are more challenging than others?
Thank you very much. Thanks to ICMPD for having us. Thanks for all of you who come here. I think it's the one occasion in the year where you can meet pretty much everybody. Member states, agencies, parliamentarians, NGOs, UNHCR, IOM, you name it. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and I think you know, it's very nice to have a big audience, but I think the most important meetings happen actually outside over coffee, lunch, and dinner. So it's a pleasure to be here again. On the pact, for those of you who don't know that yet, it's a beautiful thing. In German, we call it Gesamtkunstwerk. That means, like this building, every little detail fits together, and every little detail depends on another detail, and only if they come all together, you get a palais like this, or the pact. I think it's fair to remember 2 years ago, people constantly asked us, and Commissioner Johansson, do you believe that you will succeed in this? And we constantly said yes, and everybody else constantly said this is not going to happen. So as difficult as it was to get here, as important it is now to implement, and as far as we are concerned, we are in the implementation phase. One challenge we face is, you mentioned it already, the recast of the Return Directive, which we proposed in 2018, and between the two institutions it didn't get anywhere. And now, of course, times have changed, and I think one of the elements of the pact influences the discussion, and that is that many things that in the past, including for migrants, were optional, now have become mandatory with the pact. The nature and the character of our approach has changed. And therefore on return as well, and I appreciate that there was a very lively discussion yesterday, which is always a good thing to have lively discussions at conferences. Of course, the debate goes on. Now, for us in the Commission, in the meantime, we have to implement the pact. We got organized very quickly in country teams. So me personally, I do Austria and Spain. I would say one major challenge that we see is the interdependence of the various pact elements. We call them building blocks, but one doesn't function without the other. If you don't have a functioning Eurodac system, the system of responsibility, solidarity will not work. If you don't have a functioning screening and border procedure, the system of asylum will not work. If you don't have a functioning reception system, the asylum processing will come to a halt, and so on and so on. So it's the interdependence that is one challenge, I think, for member states. The other challenge is that the pact being a beautiful thing, it's a bit like me, it's massive. Not beautiful, but massive. And there are certain countries with constitutional and legislative and parliamentary traditions that the pact simply doesn't recognize. The pact is the pact. So some of just the legal challenges in terms of legal reform in some of our member states are massive, and there are debates in some member states, do we have to change our constitution? Or is this compatible or not? That is one thing. Another thing is in particular the countries with federal systems, the Pact prescribing a relatively centralized approach, not taking into account of these different levels. Austria is one example, Spain is another one, Germany is the one most often cited. There as well, there are huge challenges because the number of your stakeholders becomes so big so quickly that it's very, very difficult to coordinate. And then the last element, I would say, in which our agencies, and for the moment in particular the Asylum Agency, help a lot is, okay, I need facilities at the border. What type of facilities? How much personnel do I need per migrant? How much is that going to cost? Therefore, just formulating the financial cost is a challenge in which EOAA, for instance, helps us tremendously. Now, last point, just to recall this 2-year deadline, 2026, is something that member states in the Council asked for and agreed on. This was not our proposal, but I think we absolutely need these 2 years. We are a bit in a lull because now the work happens behind closed doors. Of course, we also include colleagues from the UN, we include civil society to the extent possible, but it happens behind closed doors, so at the European Council the discussion moves on. Now it's return was the big subject last week, but also instrumentalization. But next year we will come closer to the operational reality when we will need to issue a first report that will have solidarity and financial implications. So I expect that this time next year actually more people will talk about Pact implementation than right now.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think you put it in your own very nice words, Gesamtkunstwerk for the German speakers. I think, describing the interdependency where, I mean, very often we focus on one legislative piece, on another one and so on, but it's, in the end, the aim and the objective is a system which functions. You pointed out to some member states, and again, I think it is very interesting, 27 member states, very different administrative traditions, ways of working, federal system, as you pointed out, with its own competences. And then, something, partially new when it comes to the border procedure, facilities which are needed, and and probably a few others could be named. Then now, okay, interesting what you said on it was not the Commission on, for the 2 years. Now, you're still in the role as the Commission, let's put it that way, to keep the shop together. I mean, to keep it all moving towards the target. And when we don't have now the sort of the flow chart, but there are all sort of charts by the Commission, by the Parliament, where you see the one step, there's basically one deadline after the other. If it's not for the Commission, it's for member states. I mean, at the moment, I think the overall focus is on the national implementation plans, but I think then it comes with the contingency plans. I mean, there's one. Is that so? That for the 2, that's the rhythm you have. I mean, which has been deliberately chosen. Is that also a way to keep everybody on board? Or, I mean, I think many commented, or what I've read is it's different from the past. In the past as well, the Commission said there is an annual report. And then you said, oh, great, there's an annual report. But now, at least it gives the impression that the annual report, whatever is written there, it has a consequence. It leads to something. So there is a difference?
I think there's a huge difference. I'll start with a mea culpa, which comes from the system. This is a shared competence, and everybody plays their role. But when we sent our first needs assessment to Austria, for instance, since we are here, I'm not sure that our Austrian colleagues necessarily recognized themselves in what the Commission sent them, and then corrected and complemented what the Commission sent them. So we have to recognize that some member states, particularly those where we had very intensive work and memorandum of understanding, Greece for instance, in Brussels we know very well. But most member states we don't know very well. We don't know what the challenges are, we don't know what is in the constitution, what can be changed more easily. And therefore this process in which we are engaged with member states to agree now what are the needs, what needs to be done and what needs to be done by when, I think has already changed the dynamic quite a bit. We had for this annual report a dry run, and I'm very happy we did it because the dry run showed that there are big holes in the information provision, information that member states either don't have, haven't yet collected, need to still build, but it's information that will be needed to decide who's under pressure, who is likely to be under pressure, who is in a crisis situation, in other words, who needs solidarity. And as you know, solidarity can be relocations, it can be in-kind assistance, but it can also be financial assistance. So the report, and the first one will be issued in, I think it's October next year, information collection starting before the summer, is a report that will make some people happy and others not too happy. As with the Pact, if at the end of the report everybody is slightly unhappy but nobody protests really, I think then we will know that we have done a good job. But indeed, that's why I also say next year, this time, more people will talk about the Pact than right now. There is, we never made the link, but you will have seen in the political guidelines of President von der Leyen that she also wants a streamlined and I would say a more results-based approach to the multi-annual financial perspective and the budgeting. By this time next year, I would expect that these two discussions will also overlap a little bit more. So there will be a lot coming. One last point I would want to make is if somebody can implement now elements of the Pact that can be implemented under the current acquis, do it. As I said, in the current acquis, quite a few things that are optional will then become obligatory, but nothing keeps member states from starting with that implementation now. And you know, the other debates like the one on return, me personally, I welcome it. Because I work on the so-called external dimension, it's also a notion we need to change. I'm not from outer space. What we need is a migration foreign policy, or a foreign policy on migration. And I think the language here is important because the external dimension is still sort of, well, this is not really foreign policy, this is something for the, you know, these migration people and the policemen and so on. But when the Prime Minister goes to country X, she doesn't have to talk about migration. That also needs to change, and I think the Pact will make it necessary, and the return discussion shows that we need a migration foreign policy. We need a big migration element in foreign policy, and it needs to become a habit that this subject is addressed also with third countries.
But to stay a little bit, we can go, since you're covering many areas, and I mean, already the audience, please do start thinking about your questions. You have a very vocal speaker on stage, and certainly welcome questions also then afterwards from the audience. But on the Pact, I think, I mean, one, as I said in the introduction, you know, to make the legal reality an operational reality, I think there becomes clear that, I mean, that's also our experience actually in our work with some of our member states. It's very heavy work, and you pointed out, I mean, it's really far-reaching, and you know, I think if you're not really involved in translating legislation into practice, sometimes you don't realize, or not only into practice, but then also national legislation and procedures. And as you rightly point out, does it need actually constitutional change or not? I mean, that shows how far this can go. But then there's also what I would call sort of the political reality. do you think that is there in, if you want to talk about it, but in the meetings you find yourself with member states, I mean, we hear every now and then there is a different way of discussing. There's a different, I mean, you know, their way of looking at things to try to find solutions, or is that wishful thinking of observers like me and and others in the room? Or is there something which there is sort of this feeling we're in for that together? The ministers yesterday, I think they said something like that. They said there is the pact, there is no alternative. Whatever else and we can come to that now in a moment, we add to it in terms of discussions. But yeah, we're in for that together. But does that, in terms of working, or do we have the old, and we have countries where they will say, oh, but we have secondary movements, we have this, we have that. Is there a change?
I think so. I mean, I'm not a politician, you will understand, and my employment depends on not trying to become one in public. So, and at my age, you want to see it through. The end isn't that far. Would be a pity to have to quit earlier. But I would say, yes, I think, you know, for instance, last week's European Council was remarkable in the sense that the level of agreement was remarkable. I think everybody around the table, left, right, and center, recognized that what Prime Minister Tusk had to say about the Polish border is a real issue. And it's not just a fantasy and it's not just rhetoric, it's a real issue. I think that everybody also recognizes that, and that's why I think this pressure is there and it's unrelenting. Either we deliver now, and we deliver in a visible manner and in a manner that the public, the man, woman on the street can recognize, or the winds, the political winds that blow in, and we have seen that in various elections, will become even stronger. So I think that, yes, everybody realizes this is what we have. It's not perfect, life never is, but we need to deliver, and we need to show that it has results, quantifiable, real results, in the sense that we show we can manage migration. I think, by the way, that you know, if you look at the current numbers, with the exception of the Canary Islands and some details here and there, if you look at the arrival numbers, they have come down over the last year. I think another thing where we all agree now is that we need to invest in prevention, that we need to go to third countries and help them manage their systems and make sure that people don't leave irregularly, which is cheaper than returns and which is also easier because most third country governments actually agree that it's a good thing to prevent irregular migration. One last point where I see a bit of a change, which is a bit less comfortable, and it's not that comfortable for us either, is, so to speak, that the Commission, to put it crudely, now gets its nose into things that in the past it didn't. We now need to know details about reception systems because the legislation says you give us these details and we then on the basis of that will make calculations that will give you a total at the end that you might or might not receive. So the involvement of the Commission is much stronger, but I think that that will also help first to recognize much more what the national challenges are, and they are very, very different, as you said. But also how we have to adjust our own policies, and I think it's very good that we have this now, just at the time when discussions on the next multi-annual financial perspective start, because we will, by this time next year, I think, have a very good understanding of the overall cost of this over time, and therefore this information can then be integrated into those discussions. One last point, give you one example on fundamental rights. where the dynamic, I think, has changed also because we have all these nice fundamental rights provisions, but they are law. So how do you translate this? And that's where another agency, FRA, came in, helped with guidelines. So I think the cooperation with agencies is getting much tighter. In the past, we could observe that member states, didn't regard it as a badge of honor if they had to work with an agency. Now, I think the doors are wide open, and our challenge is rather the contrary. How do we cope with all these demands? So I think that's also a very good thing that this process has brought the agencies really also to the core of the work.
And we'll continue that discussion afterwards. We have a few more minutes. Just to, to stay on the last, you described already, the political landscape, the discussions we refer to European Council, and I don't want to get you into trouble for your and whatever we or I ask you, but looking at the Pact, some say, okay, now there are the voices. And that could be something interesting now. Then the official position of the Commission on, let's be quicker. I think there was then a formulation in the European Council. We can look at certain things, or it's piloting something. If what could be that? You said already. Member states are free to move on the current legislation already. Certain things. But then questions to think about more, return hubs, or is it anything else? Do you see the danger that undermines the Pact, or is it useful thinking which adds actually to strengthening a European system in the end? Because recognizing, yes, we have a core, that's the Pact, but there are other things, why not think about it? Or is it seen then also by the Commission, goes far, isn't that undermining actually what we just agreed?
No, I don't think so. I think it's very useful. First of all, we're used to work under pressure, and we know that pressure is useful. Secondly, we know, for instance, on returns, we have a problem. We have a return rate of 20-some%. We know that while the general debate focuses on third countries, there's a lot of homework to be done inside the European Union and inside member states. Give you one example, how long can you detain a person? Well, if it's only 5 days, forget the return. You can't organize a return in 5 days. And then nasty things happen when people are released. On the issue of doing things faster, it's good. We'll try to do them even faster. But as a practitioner who talks in particular to third country administrations, there are lots of things we could do very fast, and we're not doing them because there's no consensus in doing them. So I think the debate of last week was particularly helpful because when I saw the request then of my political authorities on the additional information that is needed, it's needed in quite a number of areas where we need to do other things. I'll give you one example. The President said in her political guidelines she wants a visa strategy. Partially, visa and migration overlap. Visa and security overlap. 21%, I think it was in 2023, of asylum applications came from people who entered the Union visa-free. You could change that very quickly if you wanted to. There are other elements. So I find this additional debate, of course it eats time and energy, but it is very useful because, as I said in the beginning, and that was one of my worries because I mostly deal with returns, if we want the border procedure to work, returns have to work. And at 20% return rate, I wouldn't call that a big success. So it is useful that we reflect on alternatives, on new models, that we pilot them in order to see how we can improve there. And it's useful also because it gives bureaucrats like me a chance to say, hello, there's another element where we could actually do something relatively quickly if we have the political will to do it. Another is the notion of a migration foreign policy, because as you know, foreign policy in the Union is very, very difficult in the sense of getting everybody together, representing one position vis-à-vis third countries, which is also something that when we have it, and we have it from time to time, we actually succeed in increasing returns.
And then in 1 minute we'll open for questions and comments. I mean, we had yesterday also the very last session. We had the Undersecretary, I think that was his title, from Poland, who gave a bit of sort of an outlook. He also, I mean, visa he mentioned, I think. I mean, he gave explanation of the current Polish position, as we heard last, following the statements from last week. But then also mentioning, for instance, I mean, visa, you mentioned it as well, returns, but also carrier. Actually, I think the regulation for carrier liability. Are there other, I don't know, legislative pieces which, I mean, as you said, now is the moment for the senior officials to say, hey, there's something else missing if you want to build a European system?
Well, actually, in this case, it was the President of the European Commission. I'm told she said at the Council that we have a GSP proposal that links GSP, that would have linked GSP with delivering on returns. That never made it into legislation. So I would expect that we will have another look at that, which is good. And the transport operators regulation or directive, it's about transport operators. It sounds very boring. Is an extremely important piece of legislation, because what we proposed was, if you as an airline contribute to, either intentionally or because of lack of controls, contribute to irregular migration, this can have consequences to your access to the European market. We have a tendency, general, to underestimate our own power. We had an inkling of that when in the first so-called Belarus crisis in 2022, when the President actually came out and said that she would look at that. We had an immediate reaction from airlines. And the fact of the matter is that, in particular, those from very far-flung destinations, Pakistan, for instance, Bangladesh, do take airplanes mostly to the Middle East, and then from there make it to the coast, or they land in Benghazi, and from there they then go on their dangerous journeys. And obviously, if we had another strong commercial instrument to stop that or to reduce that, it would be very effective. So those are already two things that are on the table where we could move very quickly if there's a will.
Okay. Thank you already. There are already questions. There's one over here. Yes, please. If you also very briefly you say who you are and have a question or comment to the point.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Luchner, for your remarks. My name is Svenja Niederfranke. I work for the German Council on Foreign Relations. And I have three very quick questions, if I may. First one on the Gesamtkunstwerk, and specifically about discussions on the Return Directive and Crisis Regulation. You said times have changed, and I don't quite understand, in the area of low return rates, that is not a new thing. Why is it a Gesamtkunstwerk if we're now looking into a new proposal on return and discussions on the crisis regulation? That's the first question.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I couldn't hear it.
Why is the new pact a Gesamtkunstwerk if we're now looking into a new proposal for the return directive and member states want to open up the crisis regulation? Second question, what is the timeline for a new proposal on the return directive? Could you give any insights on that? And then if I may ask the question on the return hubs, the President von der Leyen said in her letter that she wants to explore this. I saw a feasibility study from the Commission from 2018 on this exact issue, so it is not really an innovative solution, and there the Commission said that there are significant legal and practical challenges with regards to return hubs. Has this assessment changed in the Commission? And with regards to practical challenges, who will be tasked with finding a potential partner country? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think there was a lady in the back, if you don't mind. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Luchner. My name is Claudia Sturt. I'm the Immigration Director for Serco, who's a government outsourcing provider. The achievement of getting so many member states to agree to this pact is astonishing, and I really like the idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk as a way of characterizing it. But I just wondered on your view about how much of a design problem it is to have a relatively pain-free opt-out provision for member states, and how will the community respond if too many states take the opt-out option?
The opt-out from what?
From the pact.
Opt-out in general.
Ah, okay.
Okay. And one last one, I think then I'm let you run over to the gentleman over there.
Yes, here. Frederick Balm from International SOS. We do provide medical assistance services along the MEDRA program. My question is around the prevention aspects you mentioned. Do you see investment in healthcare in these countries of origin because of the gaps? And do you see a role to be taken by DG INPA to invest more funds in healthcare? I'm thinking if you compare the spend in healthcare between EU, which is a big donor, and USAID, USAID is investing much more in healthcare as donors than EU. Health does not seem to be so far that big area of focus, and this is of course one key area in terms of prevention, we do believe, coming from this field.
Thank you. So we're on the Pact and beyond.
Yeah.
Johannes.
Okay, I start with the last question. We have had a considerable change of orientation in what we want to use INTPA money for, or NDICI money for, called the Global Gateway. When I think of prevention, quite honestly, maybe I've been in this too long, but what I think about is drones, radars, border crossing points, boats, aerial surveillance, if you will, maybe we should call it hardcore prevention. I don't know what the right word would be. There are, of course, other initiatives and a strong focus on the root causes. Now, I'm not an expert on healthcare, nor do I know what INPA spends on healthcare, but I give you one example. Senegal, because I was just recently there, we have a budget support program of 70 million just for youth employment. And part of that, of course, is counted as root causes. At the same time, we have a situation where the Police Maritime has 2 6-meter boats with which you don't do much of anything. And they cover the zone up until the open sea, where the Navy, which is very well equipped, can then take over, but it's exactly that stretch that is problematic. So there we very quickly were able to now say we need to invest in order to prevent people from fleeing. So it's that kind of, not from fleeing, from migrating. It's that kind of prevention policy I talk about. On return hubs, yes, I'm not aware of an area where if there was consensus, budget and legal challenges would have prevented us to look into. And I think we need to take seriously what our heads of state and government tell us, and the President of the European Commission. So it's definitely something we will look into, and yes, there are challenges, and yes, it makes quite a lot of sense potentially in practical terms. So this is a discussion I would expect to continue, and we need to look at the challenges. We need to look at the legal challenges, the human challenges. We need to look at the cost. I don't think anybody has in mind that now everybody arriving in Europe and getting a negative asylum decision and therefore a return decision will immediately be transferred to a return hub. This is about looking at possibilities of how we can make returns happen in a more effective manner. On the timeline for the return, or maybe why now the return directive, the crisis regulation, well, that's quite easy. As I said, the return proposal was made in 2018, and times have changed. We know much more now than we knew in 2018. Mari Juric, our return coordinator, is here. We know much more as to what needs to be changed inside the Union. We also know much more as to what we need outside the Union. For instance, give you just one very banal example, criminal records. I have no legal basis to give any third country a criminal record. It's all based on national legislation. Some member states do, others don't. Now, what do I tell a minister who says to me, Mr. Luchner, very fine, but if it's a terrorist, please let me know. I cannot have a terrorist flown into my country and returned, a citizen of this country, without knowing, because obviously I need to know. If it's a murderer, I need to know. There are many, many practical elements for which we don't have a legal basis, which we need. Crisis regulation, the Pact debate started in 2015, and then of course it failed and it was resuscitated and so on. But we now have a very large-scale war on our continent, and we are faced for the first time with two regimes, Belarus and Russia, who use migrants as a weapon of hybrid warfare. And therefore, we will need to adapt to this reality, and it's a new, I think it's a less general definition of instrumentalization than the one we had in mind so far. We thought, well, you use this as a bit of an incentive or a bit of a threat. We didn't think before 2022, February 2022, that we need to think of this as something that will be used in hybrid warfare, so we need to adjust. On your question on the timeline for the return directive, 100,000 euros for an answer, I would like to know. That's under discussion, and we have of course been working on it, but the decision will come very shortly, I would imagine, as to what timeline we have to work towards.
You don't see that, but we have some red clock with a big minus in front of us. So
is that bad?
That is bad, I think. Johannes, thank you very much for your openness and for joining us and for
thank you.
Commenting, explaining the Pact, your own work, but also looking beyond. It's a pleasure to having you
being here.
And if you join me, thank you.